There we go. And hopefully everyone is here and you can see the screen and we're ready to go. So if we just get started with a little bit of background information, really. So a little introduction to me for anybody who is new here, who sort of got sent the link for this and thought, oh, I don't know who this is, I don't know what's going on. Let me just give you a little bit of background. So my name's Sophie, I'm from the Judgment Index, and the Judgment Index itself is a short online assessment that measures what we call value-based behaviours. So our care clients use it as part of their recruitment process. They use it for their appraisals of staff, and we use it for some team development as well, looking at things like well-being and that type of thing as well. And what I'm going to do today, and the reason why I just give you that little bit of background, is I will share and I will reference some research that was done using the Judgment Index assessment. So just wanted to give you that little bit of background. In terms of care leadership, yeah, I would describe us as experts in care leadership. In fact, we wrote a book on it called The Care Leaders Handbook, which you can find on Amazon. It is a bestseller, it's really practical. And actually some of what I'm going to talk about today is in the book as well. So you might find some more useful bits and pieces in there. And that book is designed for, managers, team leaders, anybody who's kind of stepping into that leadership position and might have experience when it comes to the knowledge and skills, but maybe not so much experience in terms of leading a team. And then finally, if my voice sounds familiar, I used to host a podcast. It was actually the first podcast for social care, which was called The Road to Outstanding. And you can still find that on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts from. There's around about 60 episodes, and the majority of them are interviews with care leaders and asking them, how did they get outstanding? What did they do? And kind of really delving into the story there. So hopefully you will find a lot of that bit of background interesting, and let's talk about what we're going to cover today. And I'm just going to kind of rejig some of my screen just so that I can kind of see things better. I've got it all crammed into one screen so that I can let people in, keep an eye on the chat, actually see my slides so that I know what I'm talking about. But what are we going to talk about today? I mean, really, it does all boil down to leadership. You can't talk about culture without talking about leadership, because it really is driven by the leader. So you will see a QR code on the screen. Don't worry about that too much if you don't have your phone in front of you. But if you do want to scan that and pop your email address in, you'll automatically be sent these slides. But don't worry, no pressure to do that, because I'll make sure that they go out to everyone anyway at the end of today. So following the theme of our book, leadership really starts with leading yourself first and foremost. And then we're going to look at a bit of a strategy around how you can do that. Moving on from that, we're going to talk about leading others and how to lead others effectively. And then we're going to get into the actual culture piece. So we're going to put together a roadmap for you, and something that really can have an impact within 30 days. And we do have the proof of this, because we did work with a client who saw a noticeable difference. And not only that, people who were stakeholders in their business saw a noticeable difference in 30 days. So that's what I'm going to cover with you today. And if I just move my slides along. So where are we going to start? We have to acknowledge, as I said earlier, that great culture really can't thrive without great leadership. And it's an interesting one, because it's useful to understand what great leaders actually have in common. Well, we participated in some research of outstanding managers, using outstanding as the benchmark back in 2019. It might have been a year earlier than that. And with that research on outstanding managers, we found that there were a few key differentiators between these outstanding rated managers and other managers within the care sector. And I thought that this is a really useful place to start. So wherever you are right now, if you are a leader yourself, or perhaps you're stepping into that leadership position, Or perhaps you're someone from an organizational point of view where you have managers that you are working with, perhaps your operations, or perhaps you're an owner operator, and thinking really about how you might lead yourself first. So I don't know if you are able to pop in the chat. Are you here today? You know, are you a manager? Are you a leader in some capacity, or do you manage a team? And I will talk a lot today, and I'll say you. But obviously bear in mind that if you do have a team who are leaders, you might also be thinking about them as well, and how they actually lead themselves, for example. So thinking about yourself and leading yourself, these are the things that we found with outstanding managers. And I've just highlighted the kind of real key points that stood out for us in terms of what outstanding managers had in common. Now, the full study does show a lot more than this, and I will get this out to you afterwards. And these are actually the judgment index findings. So the research involved asking lots of questions about the managers, you know, including their sort of age demographic, that type of thing, how long they've been in care for. But these were the judgment index findings using the assessment, the judgment index assessment. And what I find really interesting is I'm just going to pick a few out here. Balanced focus of people, task, and big picture thinking. So if you think about these three things as three different lenses in which you might see the world as a leader. So you've got people, you've got everything to do with people, you know, showing your compassion for people, working with people, considering people. Then you've got the task at hand, which is almost the kind of practical stuff, getting on with the job, the things that you have to do day to day, things on the checklist. And then you've got big picture thinking, which is almost this kind of strategic outlook on the business, let's say, or the home or the organization that you work in. So it's thinking about it in terms of the big picture. Now, if you think of all three of these as three lenses, which one do you think is the strongest for you? Now, obviously, you can see here from the slide, what we found with the outstanding managers is that they were very balanced in all three. But thinking of yourself, or perhaps thinking of leaders that you work with, how many leaders do you know that are too task focused? And maybe that's something that's almost become part of the job, that we have to be very focused on what needs to be done. But how many of you feel like that lens would quite possibly be the strongest lens? This needs to be done, that needs to be done, these are the things we have to do today. And that almost becomes the dominating factor when it comes with these three. So that's something that is worth considering. But these outstanding managers were not only able to focus on the task, but they were able to focus on people to an equal degree. And they were also able to bring in this big picture thinking, this strategic thinking, which is all about considering things like consequences and implications. So, okay, if we do this, what will happen? Or what's the benefit of this? What's the consequence of this? What could happen if we do this? So maybe have a little think for yourself and think, where am I with these three? Maybe write the three of them down and maybe rate yourself out of 10 for each of them and think, okay, where am I? People, task, big picture. So that was kind of one real key thing that stood out for us. And then another thing that stood out is this one at the bottom that says good well-being. And this is what I want to come to now and look at actually what is well-being, because I'm sure that many of you have been on webinars or training, or you've heard this as a buzzword. Everyone's talking about well-being, but what actually is it, and what does it mean in this context? So what we found with the outstanding managers critically is that they were pretty comfortable in themselves. Obviously, they could handle stress. They were confident in themselves, and this resulted in them having a good overall well-being. So I'm going to give you a little exercise to do now. And if any of you have a notepad and pen, please feel free to kind of scribble this down. But if not, just imagine it in your head. And thank you for people who are sort of commenting and letting me know what your kind of position is from a leadership perspective. As I mentioned, I'm going to say you quite a lot. So I'm going to presume that everyone here is a leader in some capacity. So what is good well-being? Well, what I want you to think about, a little exercise, is the energy that you have that you put into your work. So the energy that basically you direct externally on a day-to-day basis. So whether that's energy for your team, whether that's energy for your clients or your residents or whatever that might be, energy for doing the job, energy for basically anything that is outside of you. So you could almost include things like your family in that, energy for your kids perhaps. And then what I want you to think about is the energy that you give back to yourself for you. So whether that's taking time for yourself outside of work, whether that is setting good boundaries between, work and life, whether that's thinking about what you might do for yourself in terms of hobbies. Think about those two things. And what I'm going to ask you to do, we've got a little model that we're going to go through. Now, I want you to take two rectangles and just draw them like this, two stacked rectangles, and then scribble in, starting from the inside, working your way outside. The top tier is going to represent work, so the energy that you put into work, and the bottom tier is going to represent the energy that you put into yourself. So have a little scribble away. You can see my little sketch here. So which one is more full, basically? The energy that you put outwards towards work and everything else, or the energy that you put back into yourself? And what does that look like? I'm going to take you through a little model and a picture now that sort of describes, and bear with me because this might look a bit odd to start off with, but what we would like to see is something that looks a little bit like a two-tiered cake or a wedding cake, let's say. So I'll show you an image now. So on the left, what we have is the ideal sort of work-life balance, let's say, or work self-energy, as I sometimes call it. And this often results in well-being, in good well-being. So what we found with these outstanding managers and what we find with great leaders across all sectors is that they actually perform best when they have a solid foundation of self and they find ways to give energy back to themselves. So you can see that the cake on the left-hand side shows, yeah, this person gives a lot of energy to work, but it's actually being supported by a solid foundation of self. They're giving that energy back to themselves. Like I said, whether that's for hobbies, whether that's for creating good work-life boundaries, whatever that might be. But what we see a lot is the wedding cake on the right-hand side. And I'm curious if anybody is happy to share what type of cake you have sort of drawn for yourself with your scribble, what your cake would look like. They give all their energy to work. Everything is sort of being directed outwards, and actually there's very little coming back to themselves. So what is the risk with this? I mean, I think you can tell by the picture that cake is at risk. It could tip over, it could collapse, and ultimately this cake on the right-hand side does not have a solid foundation. So how can this person possibly lead themselves effectively if they don't have a solid foundation of self? And what I will say is, if the leader looks like this, the one on the right-hand side, what do you think the rest of the team might look like? Because obviously a lot of team will model themselves on what the leader's doing, what the manager's doing. So if you've carried out this exercise, if you've kind of drawn this out for yourself, this is interesting. So somebody has said right now they have the cake on the left-hand side, but for many years they had the cake on the right-hand side. And it is funny that sometimes, with age and wisdom, the wedding cake can improve. We definitely see that. But it's something that's worth thinking about. And I think when people struggle to think about well-being or what well-being is, this is a really simple model, something you could do with people during appraisals where you can ask them to think about it, particularly if you find you have people where for them work is everything and they really don't have anything else, or they're not very good at kind of having those boundaries between work and their own life. Okay, so somebody has put a message saying right now they're on the right-hand side, but they're working on it. And that's great. And hopefully this will give you that reflection of why it's important to work on that foundation of self. So I could do a whole webinar just talking about these wedding cakes, but I'm not going to, because we really do need to move on to these strategies. But this really is strategy one, is how are you leading yourself? So perhaps a good little reflection, take one moment now just to think, okay, how do I lead myself? And maybe give yourself, have a little think about what a 10 out of 10 would look like for effectively leading yourself. Would it be about turning your laptop off at certain hours when you need a break? Would it be about taking that time to go horse riding, or playing golf, or whatever it might be that is giving back to yourself? What would a 10 out of 10 look like for you for leading yourself? So kind of picture that in your mind. And now think about where you are now. What would you rate yourself now out of 10 in terms of effectively leading yourself? So have a little think, maybe jot it down. So what a 10 out of 10 looks like, we need to have that vision. Where am I now? And this will help you understand maybe if this is something that you need to work on. So I'm going to move on to now leading others effectively. So we've covered leading yourself, and now what we want to look at is how to lead others effectively. And again, it's not possible to lead a great culture if you can't lead others. And I think one of the key messages, and something that I'm going to say right off the bat with this sort of section, is the biggest mistake that I see with leaders, particularly new leaders that are kind of just stepping into that leadership position, is that they lead by preference. They lead how they want to lead. And what I will say is, it's not about leading how you like to lead. It's about leading the way that is going to be most effective for the team. And that might not be what you want to do, but it might be what works for them, because the whole point of leadership is that you get people from A to B, and you find the right way to do it. So what I find very frequently when we're running kind of leadership workshops with companies, and again, particularly at this team leader or kind of deputy level, where people don't have the experience, or they have care experience, they're moving into this leadership role, is that they use one style of leadership, and this will only resonate with around about 20% of the team. If you always lead the exact same way, you are never going to resonate with the entire team. So let's kind of put this into practice and look at what this looks like. And I've got a little scenario for you here. So 2 scenarios, in fact. On the left, you can see that we have someone being told what to do, or the leader is telling them what to do. And I've obviously written this as do this, do that. So being told. And on the right-hand side, we have the leader saying to somebody, just go for it. You know, you can do it. Just go for it. So on the left side, this, do that. This is what we call a tell style of communication. This person's being told what to do. There's no room for negotiation. You know, I'm being pretty prescriptive here. And on the right-hand side, we have what we call an empowered style of communication. You know, this member of staff is being given the freedom to just go for it. So what do you do the most, do you think? Maybe have a think about that, or thinking about your team. What do you think your team do the most? And I'll answer this obviously from my perspective, and I would say, as much as we may want to empower and we may want to do what's on the right-hand side, it's actually much easier to tell people what to do, and it is much easier to do the left-hand side. And I'm not saying it's necessarily in these exact words, but it is much easier to tell people what to do, because that's what gets things done. It often is a minimal risk approach, because you know, things will get done to the standard, to the way that you want them. So what we find with most leaders is that they will default to a tell style of communication. Now, the problem with this is that it adds pressure on the leader. You know, the leader is then responsible for telling people what to do all the time. So it can put a lot of pressure on them. You know, they're always being asked what to do. They're always having to tell people what to do. And it also can reduce confidence and motivation in staff. And what I would say is have a think of yourself now and think, have you ever worked with anyone where you have been quite capable, you've understood, you've got the experience, you've got the knowledge, but the boss is always telling you what to do? And how does that make you feel? It might demotivate you, might make you feel like you're incompetent when actually you know what you're doing. And it can start to reduce that confidence in yourself and your own ability. So there can be pros and cons, and you'll see that I'm not saying to you, this is the right way, this is the wrong way, but is it always right to empower people? And I think you'll realize in a second that's not always the right thing to do. But it is interesting to think about these two different sides. So I am curious, do you feel like you do too much tell, not enough empower? I know that the pressures of the job and the amount that needs to be done sometimes means it's just quicker, easier to tell people what to do. So what I'm going to share with you now is a useful model to understand how to lead others and how to lead them effectively. So I'll explain this model first, then we'll kind of dive into the scenarios and a little bit of detail on it. So we have, you can see that tell on the left-hand side. So that is that tell style of communication, do this, do that. We have empower on the right-hand side, which is really where you give people free rein to do whatever they want. And then in the middle, this is something that I didn't get a chance to go into too much detail about during the Health Plus Care show, but we have two others, which is sell and discuss. So let's go into a bit more detail on this. Now, at the very top, you can see that we have skill set, knowledge, and motivation. And these are almost the considerations, things that you should consider really before you decide what communication style to use with the team. And then this diagonal that you've got going through is showing ownership and responsibility. And so you can see that to the left-hand side, there is less ownership and responsibility. And this is of the members of staff of the team. And to the right-hand side, there is more ownership and responsibility, or what I should say is perceived ownership and responsibility from the members of the staff. So let's have a look at some examples. So let's say people come in the morning and you're giving out some lists of things that need to be done today, and you have a highly skilled, highly knowledgeable team who are highly motivated, and you go down the route of telling people what to do. So you start every team meeting by saying, you do this, you do this, you do this, this is what needs to get done. What do you think happens when you have a highly skilled, highly knowledgeable, motivated team and they receive that type of leadership or that type of communication every day? How do you think that might impact on them? Well, you can see from this model that actually they will feel a very low sense of ownership and responsibility over the tasks that they've been set. And so, as I said earlier, this can demotivate people. This can make people feel like, they're not trusted. It can start to make them feel underconfident in their own abilities. So if you have a highly skilled, highly knowledgeable team, actually, how about coming in on that team meeting in the morning and saying, these are the things that need to be done, go for it, figure it out, you decide who does what, and actually giving them some of that empowerment to be able to make some decisions themselves, and actually take that ownership and take that responsibility. So how does this model should be starting to come together now? But it's not always possible. I mean, let's say you have a team, let's say you have some new people on your team and you get them together and you empower them immediately. What could go wrong if you do that? You literally get brand new people in and you say, go for it, here you go, off you go. And have you ever been in that position where a manager or a leader has just kind of given you a lot of ownership and responsibility, but actually you didn't have the knowledge or you didn't have the skill set to be able to do it? That can actually have a bit of a consequence because things can go wrong. People can make mistakes. So it's about using your own judgment and your understanding of the different people on your team to actually know who you need to tell and who you can move across and start to empower. And we've got 2 steps on the way. So we go from tell, which is when, let's say you come in the morning and you say, right, this needs doing, this needs doing, and this needs doing. Go and do it. You do this, you do this, you do this. That's the tell style. Then we have the sell style of communication. And this is when you start to build in perhaps some kind of reward. Now, sell can be a reward, a positive reward, or it could be a punishment. But it's basically going down the route of, if you do X, I'll do Y. So perhaps, hey, if we can get all of this done by the end of the day, we're trying to get everything sorted before the CQC inspection, then we can order pizza on Friday, something like that. That would be the sort of sell. So yes, you start to get a bit of buy-in from the team and they start to think, oh yeah, this sounds good. We love pizza. But actually, even though it slightly increases the ownership and responsibility, there is a chance further down the line that anytime you want people to do something, you're going to have to sell it to them. So this one should be used, with some degree of caution. And then we move towards discussion. And this is something that I see a lot with new leaders, particularly new leaders that sometimes aren't comfortable stepping into a leadership role, is that they will decide to have a discussion with the team. How do you think we should do this? What do you think is the best way for us to do this? And almost bring them into that conversation. Now, again, as we're moving across the model, these people are getting an increased feeling of ownership and responsibility. They feel like, okay, we're included. We're being asked our own opinion. And obviously, this can be great if you have people on the team who are knowledgeable, who are motivated. And particularly if you're a new leader yourself and you're thinking, well, actually, I could really benefit from some discussion around this because this will help me make the right decision on how to do something. So you can start to move towards discussion, and that can be a positive thing to do as well. The one thing that I will say on that is that sometimes new leaders will use discussion as a way to almost abdicate themselves from responsibility of making decisions. So it's about that balance. I think you can see this as we go through this. It's about understanding what is the most effective communication style. And then obviously to the right-hand side, empower. And if we can move towards empowerment, we will have a team who are skilled, who are motivated, and that will really help to create the right culture within your organization. I think I'm making this quite clear. You can't lead others and you can't lead a great culture with tell alone. So definitely worth thinking. And as I did earlier, taking a moment for yourself now and thinking, okay, when I think about how I lead others and how I lead others effectively, what would a 10 out of 10 look like for me? So as an example, a 10 out of 10 for me would be that I lead, the inexperienced members of the team more through a tell style to help them understand exactly what they need to do and obviously eventually build their confidence. And that I have a discussion with some of the more experienced members of the team to get them involved and get them kind of bought in. And then the people who I know are, my deputy is so highly knowledgeable and highly skilled, I can just empower them to go and make their own decisions, and that will really give them some good ownership. Okay, so that's what a 10 out of 10 looks like for effective leadership. This is an example. Where am I now? Well, actually, I do fall in the trap of telling my deputy what to do quite a lot because I just get into a habit of it. So, maybe I'll rate myself a 6 out of 10. So have a little think through for yourself. What does a 10 out of 10 look like? Where are you now? And then maybe take a look at this leading others score that you've given yourself and the leading yourself score, and think which one needs the most work. Feel free to share in the chat. I know people aren't too chatty, but feel free to share, and I'll kind of keep an eye what comes on here. So what do you think of this model? Do you think this is something that would be useful for you to look at in a bit more detail? Is this something that you would like to share with some of your leaders, some of your team leaders? Do you think they'd be able to grasp this with working with their own teams, and maybe give them something to think about of how they're leading, how they're communicating with their team? So let's move on for the last sort of 10 minutes or so and go now to the roadmap. So we've looked at how you can lead yourself more effectively. We've looked at how you can lead others more effectively. But how do you now take both of those things and move on to leading a great culture? So what I'm going to take you through now really is step by step. So I am going to be quite prescriptive about this. But the reason why I'm taking you through this step by step is because you really can achieve results within 30 days. And I'll tell you a little bit about a company that we worked with that did this exact framework and the results that they got as well, good and bad, depending how you look at it. So step one, and as I said earlier, feel free to write these down, but I will send these slides out to you afterwards, and I might put together a little bit more description in a series of emails for you as well. But step one is to really understand where you are now. So an honest, frank look in the mirror. So I would do this yourself and maybe jot down some notes for yourself. I would also get together with your leadership team or some people that you know will be really honest and review actually what are the main culture issues within this company or within my home or within my team, however you want to look at it. So is it that there's a bit of a blame culture? People are afraid to make mistakes because they will feel like they will get blamed for anything that goes wrong. Do you have a lot of cliques within the team? And we see this a lot when you get a lot of family working at the same company, particularly if they've been there for a long time. I think cliques can definitely form and develop and can have a really big negative impact on culture. Is it just that the team are just generally disengaged, burnt out, still recovering from COVID, just demotivated? What is it? Try and kind of pull out some of those descriptive words for yourself. But then the next step is to ask the team. And I'm going to be really specific about how you should do this or how I would recommend that you do this. And obviously, if we're moving towards empowerment, if that's the goal, then we do need to ask the team. So what I recommend doing is, first of all, an anonymized survey, which you can literally go to SurveyMonkey, create a survey for free, and send it, ask people to submit or even write on bits of paper, however you want to do it. A survey to ask people, and then follow that up with a meeting with the team. So whatever way you host a team meeting. So it is important that this is done properly. And what I will say is during a survey, what a lot of people struggle with is asking good questions. So not just yes or no questions, not soft kind of vanilla questions where you're going to get a really vanilla answer. Ask those hard hitting questions like, what is the worst thing about working here? Be direct and you'll probably get a more direct answer. Ask a question such as, if you ever feel anxious about coming to work in the morning, why is it? Try and really tease out decent answers from people. And then it's really important that you look at all of this. Don't be offended at what people say. I mean, obviously, if they're personally offensive, but, you know, don't be offended. Look at these things and think, if somebody is writing this, if this is what somebody shared, if this is what they're feeling, then it's true for them. Even if you disagree, if somebody turns around and says, I feel like I'll be blamed if I make a mistake, and you disagree with that, if they're feeling it, it's true for them. So this is something which is going to impact on your culture. So it's really important that you pull them together and you share this with them. So you can do it by sharing their results on a notice board or something. Maybe you don't want visitors and things seeing it, I don't know. But pull them together and say, this is what we've been told about what the culture is like here at the moment. Let people air it out, let them vent. But once they've got past all of that, then it stops. And then you move on to the next stage, which is, right, we've heard everything that's been said. But what we need to focus on now is how we change it, And first of all, we need to identify what culture we want. Now, this isn't what you want as a leader. This really needs to be down to the staff. What is the end goal? Where do you want to go? And when you look at these things on the board, you know, on the screen, you can use these as examples for people. You know, do you want a culture of self-leadership where people can kind of step up and feel confident to make decisions? Do you want a culture where people are more respectful for each other? You know, you often hear respect as a word that's used in company values, and it's based on respect for residents or clients. But what about respecting each other as staff? Do we do that? Is that a culture that we want to bring in? Do we want better communication? So as you're looking at all of these, have a little think, you know, is there something that stands out to you? But ultimately you need to ask the staff this. But I'm sure that you are probably looking at this thinking that you want all of this as the culture for your company. So what I suggest is actually picking out some of the key ones. Now, if you're a bigger team, you could probably pick out kind of 6 or 8 of these. You might want to pick out less if you're a smaller team. And the next stage is to create what I call a culture wheel. Now, just take a little pause for a second, because I appreciate I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you to do with your team. You don't need to do all of this in one day. Perhaps take a week to do the survey and the collection of feedback of kind of what the culture's like at the moment. This session, what culture do we want? That could be the feeding back of the results and then discussing this as one session. So, you know, you could do this in a staff meeting. The next step, creating the culture wheel, this could be something that you do next. You know, I'm not saying you need to do this every day of the week, but obviously if you can, then that would be great, because you really get going on it. But my next suggestion is to create the culture wheel. So as you can see, I've split this into kind of 5 segments, but you could do more if you're a bigger team. I recommend less if you're a smaller team. And I want you to take the key areas that you want to build in your culture, and I want you to do something which I've had you all do individually throughout this webinar, which is take them one by one. So let's take wellbeing, for example, and say to the team, okay, we want a culture of wellbeing within this organization. What would a 10 out of 10 for wellbeing look like here? And I want you to solicit that feedback from people. So have people speak up and say, well, and don't, this is the most difficult thing, don't let them fixate on what it's like now. What does a 10 out of 10 look like? Okay, well, if we were a 10 out of 10 for wellbeing, then it would mean that we would have some possibility of flexible shifts, let's say, or we would have a space that's dedicated for staff, so that if you do have a break, you're able to go and sit somewhere quiet and have some time to eat your lunch. Or a 10 out of 10 is this. So get them to pull together what a 10 out of 10 would be for you. And then get them based on that to rate, where are we now? Okay, so where are we now? And you can do this as show of hands. You can get people to call out numbers. Really important for you as a leader not to influence this either. So I would withhold your own opinion, because if you say, oh, I think we're a 9 out of 10, other people will start saying, oh, we're a 9 out of 10 as well. Try and get a fair sort of section and understand. So you could do this by sort of, I don't know, you could go, everyone who thinks we're a 1, put your hand up. Everyone thinks we're a 2, put your hand up, and try and get the general gist. So let's say 4 out of 10 is the answer. You imagine this wheel sort of completely coloured in, this segment completely coloured in would be a 10 out of 10. We're a 4 out of 10. I'm going to sort of section it off, colour it in, move on to the next one. Now, you don't have to do them all in one day. Maybe this is something that you could do over the space of a week, because it sort of picks up on it every day. So you move on to the next segment, learning. What would a 10 out of 10 for a culture of learning look like for us? What would a 10 out of 10 look like? You need to get that first, because if you don't know what a 10 out of 10 is, how can you rate where you are now? And move on around the wheel. And like I say, you can do this over the course of a week, until you have a full wheel and you'll instantly be able to see where the issues are. And somebody here has actually popped in the chat that they have done this, which is fantastic, and it's really worked, and they've narrowed down core issues. So this will really help you pick out, okay, we're actually really good in this area. This area doesn't need too much of a focus, but this one, we're a 3 out of 10, we're a 4 out of 10. So this is an area that we really need to focus on. So hopefully this is coming together for you. As I said, relatively simple, doesn't cost much, you know, apart from time. I don't see how this could cost you any money, to really start to pin down what culture you want. You're getting buy-in from people because they are telling you what they want. They're telling you what it would look like. So how do you then take it a step further? So you can already start to strategize. How can we now go from 4 to 10? And people can come up with ideas and share ideas. But the next step is to create teams. So you want these to be what I call culture teams. So those 5 or 6 or 8 areas around the wheel, everyone in the company gets assigned one of those culture words or statements. And you want to mix it up. So you don't want all team leader level to be the wellbeing team and all the nurses to be the self-leadership team. You want to really, really mix it up. So everybody almost wears a hat of that culture word or statement. And then they can, amongst themselves, get together, figure out how as a team they can really start to improve the culture and improve that area. And you can empower people with this, you know. I don't want to say the words what could possibly go wrong, but what could go wrong? So, you know, you've got a team, a wellbeing team, they're coming up with ideas to improve wellbeing, they're engaged, they're motivated. And so you can really start to let people come up with their own ideas. And if it's driven by the team, if you're empowering the team in this way, then they are going to start to take it that step further. As it says on the screen, use your influencers. You will have people in your teams who are going to be a bigger influence. You need to pull them to one side. You need to make sure that they're on board. You need to make sure that they're going to drive this further. And really, you know, taking it a step back to what we talked about the pressure being on the manager, a lot of this takes the pressure off the manager because it will be driven by the individuals within your organization. It does need reinforcement. The last thing that you want is in 6 months' time, people to look back and say, oh, do you remember when we did that wheel? Nothing ever happened. That really would be the worst possible outcome. So you need to be consistent with this. And I recommend that you start to bring some visuals in this. So have people create mood boards, have people create posters that go around the home or the office, that really sort of drive the message of what you want to deliver in terms of culture. Every team meeting, let somebody from the wellbeing team speak up, let somebody from the self-leadership team speak up, let them have the courage to be able to step in with their culture hat on. And I sometimes think of this as if anybody went to a school where you had different houses at school, you know, you represent that house. You know, I'm Sophie and I'm a nurse and I represent self-leadership, and actually if we do it this way it will encourage more self-leadership within the team. Great, thank you for your input, let's do that. So you can really hopefully see how this starts to drive a positive culture. And what could you see within the results? So somebody's already commented that they've done this, it's worked, they've narrowed down their core issues, and now how can you take it further? You will find that your teams start to feel empowered. The picture on the right hand side is somebody that we've done some work with and some research with, where they wrote up all of their sort of culture statements, and they gave them sort of bigger descriptions about what they mean, you know, which is really great. And these posters were all over their home, and it starts to become the norm. People start to come and work for you and instantly buy into your culture because that's what it's like. It starts to become a place where people do feel empowered, where people can come up with their own ideas. And ultimately, all of this, even though, you know, it's taken up a few team meetings for you, can really start to make a difference. And that difference will be reflected in the quality of the people that you recruit, in your retention, and just overall having a positive place for people to work in. So the case study of the company that we worked with, they did this. They did this entire exercise over the course of a week. And a month later, they said that visiting doctors had started to comment, what's happened here? Has something changed? Have you got like new people in the team? Or has something, they couldn't understand the shift. It was so noticeable in a positive direction. And I think that this is worth remembering. This is what you can achieve in such a short space of time because everybody was bought in. Now, before somebody asks in the chat, what do you do with people that aren't bought in? This particular home did have 2 people leave after they did this exercise. They had 2 people that just wouldn't stop complaining, that said things will never change. This is the way it's always been. And those 2 people did end up leaving because the power of the rest of the team wanting that culture shift overrode their negativity. And you know what they say, one spoilt apple spoils the apple cart, or words to that effect. So you do really need to be mindful of people who are the negative influence, who will try to bring this down. But I think if you have the the positive outlook and the determination to make this happen, your team will come on board, use those influences within your team, and together you can create great culture. It is possible, I promise. It doesn't take a day, but you can make a difference in 30 days. Now, one thing that I said at the show, and I don't know how many people we have left on the call, I can't see the numbers in front of me, but when I spoke at the show, there was probably about 100 people in the audience, and I said to them, I truly believe that only 10% of you will actually go away and take these steps. But those 10% will see that difference. Now, obviously, Nav in the chat has said that they've done it. So you're in that 10% club. Thank you very much, Nav. And I'm glad that it's already been worth it for you. But for everyone else, are you feeling like you can commit to make a start on this? Now, I've walked you through the steps today, but what I will get out to you is the recording and also some more detail on how you can do this. So I'll really sort of break it down into the steps for you. But how is everyone feeling? I wonder if there's any questions. I'll just come to the last slide. So again, don't worry about the QR code because you will get the information anyway. But if you do want to connect with me either on LinkedIn or Judgment Index is on Twitter, LinkedIn, etc., all of those places, then feel free. I do post quite a lot of stuff about leadership and culture on LinkedIn as well, if that's of interest. But I'm curious if there are any questions or anything that